Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Angela, and we are back with Memoirs of a Birth Mother, written by me. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble. It's on Amazon as an ebook and a book. I will post the links below in the description box. We've read 1 through 10. We are going to read chapter 11 today. Um, if you want to see all of the chapters, they're all on my channel. And it's kind of a little bit bigger chapter, so let's get into it because I am losing daylight. It's now almost 8 o'clock. So, chapter 11. The next several months after giving my daughter up for adoption, I did anything and everything I could to not think about it, or I knew I would fall apart. The one thing driving me was to make her proud of me. The first thing I did of many idiotic things I did over the course of the next several months to try and forget about the fact that I had given up my child for adoption was join the Air Force. Yes, it was a good decision for my future and all that jazz. Yet I was so messed up from all that had happened, it would be my first failure in life. I only partially blamed the recruiter, as I should never have joined at that time in my life. I was so jacked up after everything that had happened, I never stood a chance. It was another one of those instances that I thought if I ran far enough and fast enough, I could possibly outrun my past. I again ran so far and so fast, I wound up running straight into the military and joined up. Does this sound familiar to anyone? There is a theme here. Not yet learning to process my feelings, I chose to run. Again. I should have known it wasn't a great idea after the last time I ran headlong into something. It was amazingly awful. The recruiter made it sound like it was the answer to all of my prayers, like it was a vacation I would be getting paid for. Now I knew, even then, I wasn't that gullible. I knew there would be some work involved. After all, it is the military, for crying out loud. However, I again was not mentally prepared for the physiological warfare or psychological warfare I was about to go through. The irony of it all is this: the military is supposed to break you down mentally and then build you back up into a fighting machine, a warrior, a fighter, what they needed you to do, what they needed you to be. But I was already broken. What then? There was nowhere to go but down even further. I joined the Air Force to fight the good fight and win the war. I didn't realize there was already a war brewing inside of me. So I was unprepared for the war that would play on my psyche. As my mind was already on the cusp of shattering, there was no way I could handle everything they threw at me during boot camp. I just tried to band-aid my broken spirit in the worst place imaginable to do so. I still think to myself over 20 years later, what the hell were you thinking? It was dark and raining the night I landed at the airport, my first plane ride ever. They bussed us on into the base from there. There was a group of military personnel there that met us and shoved as many of us onto the bus as it could hold, and then quickly drove to the base. They were nice, quiet, polite even, and yet the second I stepped off the bus and into the driving rain, I knew this had been a mistake. It was as if I was in some kind of movie and they were sneaking us all into the base in the dead of night. Now I know I've seen this movie before, and it never ends well for the peons. I can remember the moment I stepped off the bus. I could even smell the cold rain as it drenched me. A chill washed over me as we were immediately yelled at to get in line. There was no welcoming committee. There was no welcome to your life for the next 4 years. There was only screaming and commands shouted at us through the darkness. In that instant, I regretted my choice to join up. We were then told this is not camp. This was the U.S. Air Force, and between the darkness, the screaming, and the rain, I knew the next 6 weeks were going to be scarier than anything I'd ever faced. It was going to force me to deal with my past, face my mother, my child, and anything else I was afraid of looking at too closely. I was petrified. Here we were on a bus full of hopefuls, all trying to better our situation. all being told the same lies about how great this was going to be for our future, how we would be getting so many opportunities. I'm sure if you make it out of basic training, there were great opportunities. If you can manage to make it out of the emotional landmine that is basic training alive, that is. At least try not to be a, at least try not being a traumatized, neurotic mess when you enter training. Yet the moment I stepped off that bus into the rain around midnight, the bitter cold seeping into my bones, I knew that ship had sailed. I was terrified. Someone that hadn't dealt with, well, anything that had happened in their life, and over the next several weeks, it would bring all the trauma to the surface, and I would be nothing but a puddle of weeping sadness. The military is no place to show that kind of weakness. They would use this to try and break me, and depending on who you ask, they almost succeeded. It was a time in my life that I was adrift, and I'd yet to discover how horrid the next few months would be for me. It all began with this decision I made to try and better my life, all centered around making my daughter proud of me. These were the thoughts that plagued me throughout the entirety of my 6 weeks of basic training, and eventually what caused me to leave. Ironically, the thing that drove me to join the military is the very reason I quit. I'm not blaming my daughter, though. I should have never joined in the state I was in. I was still grieving over the loss of her, and it pained me to no end that I had failed this too. I felt that all of the years my mother had screamed at me that I would never be anything but a failure came flooding back to me, and maybe, just maybe, she was right. The moment I stepped off that bus and into the pouring rain, into a nightmare of my own doing, I knew it had been a mistake, one of clearly epic proportions. I almost began to cry right there on the spot, and even though I pushed myself to see it through. My only thoughts throughout the next few weeks, my daughter. Every day that I woke up sleep deprived, every day I was cussed out and called a worthless piece of crap, every day I sunk a little deeper into myself. My only companion, my daughter. I carried her with me to the end, and there is even a video of our class circulating somewhere that has me telling her, I love you. She was my beacon of light in the darkness. She was my lifeline when there was no way out. She was my salvation. There were times when I thought, how can I get out of this? And then I did. I spent the 6 weeks training sleep deprived and miserable, but it all came to a head the night I fell asleep. I and one other person who were on a pretend night watch duty, and we hadn't slept for the almost 5 weeks we had been there. Since every time it was our turn to get to sleep in, they would accidentally wake us up instead of our brother flight across the hall for KP duty. And instead of letting us sleep, they would simply say, well, since you're up, let's all go for a run, 10-mile run at 3 a.m. I was exhausted. And standing up all night in a dark room with nothing but a flashlight and a podium, well, what can I say? I was weak. The next thing I knew, I was being hauled into the big office with AC and a man that looked old enough to be God's father to explain my actions. He, like everyone else, called it his Air Force and asked me why I should let you stay in my Air Force. I, being so sleep deprived, began to laugh. Not a good thing. Yet at this point, I no longer cared about court-martials or going AWOL or anything. I just wanted to sleep. After a few minutes of unhinged laughter, I wiped the tears from my eyes, looked him square in the eye, and said, Sir, I can't think of a damned good reason. Send me home, please. Now. After his initial shock that a little girl would dare talk to him like that, I think he was speechless for the first time in his life. He cleared his throat and said, well, then all right. I got my stuff out of my bunker and was sent to what was affectionately known as Med Hell, or the correct term, medical hold, to await my one-way ticket back home. It took a week. It was a relief, and at the same time, I was heartbroken. My first thoughts were, what will my daughter think? She would think I'm a quitter, too, just as my mother predicted. However, this was the very first time I'd stood up for myself with a virtual stranger. And between you and me, I think he could see in my eyes the trauma I'd already been through. I did get to speak with my TA later on, and she spoke to me as if I was a person, not a maggot. The person that was cruel and unrelenting, the woman that my crew and I would say if she could just get laid, maybe she wouldn't be such a bitch. She said, "We are just here to break you down of everything you know so we can build you up into a fighting machine." I looked her dead in the face and said, "I get that, but answer me this. What if you are already broken when you arrive? What then?" No matter how old I get or what memory I lose, I don't think I will ever forget the look that crossed her face, as if this thought had never occurred to her. I looked at, even though she was a hard ass and thought she knew everything there was to know, I, a measly peon, had taught her a valuable lesson in those few short words. She teared up and even apologized to me. What? It was a moment I will never forget, and even though I look back on it now and think maybe that they just saw this crazy person that needed help, I also think it was the very first time I stripped all my carefully cultivated mask and let someone see me. The damaged, confused, naive little girl I still was, and it scared the crap out of them. Don't get me wrong, there were some good times while in the military. It was a proud moment for me when I was one of the first few to finish the confidence course, being a tiny woman and one that had just given birth a few months before. I was elated to see myself blowing past grown men, watching them fail in my wake. It was one of those days that nothing could go wrong, and it gave me a little boost of confidence I needed to think I could make it through the hell that was basic training. It was an amazing feeling, one that quickly died out the very next day, but I will carry that moment with me always. The feeling of pure, unadulterated joy was hard to find in an environment like that. Then there was the weaponry, the only reason I had for being there as long as I was, the M16. It was a feeling unlike anything I'd ever felt before or since. To hold that powerful weapon in your hand, to learn how to break it down, see what makes it tick, and then put it back together again in record time. To feel it heavy in your hands as you squeeze off the trigger and watch in breathless admiration as the bullet explodes out of it and flies aiming for your intended target. It's no wonder my husband loves to go hunting every year. I had another moment of elated pride when our all-girl flight beat the all-boy flight at a time test to see who could take our guns apart and put back together the fastest. Everyone was shocked when us girls beat the boys by several minutes. Even now I chuckle at the thought of that day. Another day it was sunny, and for that time of year that was rare. Besides that, all I had left that I enjoyed was the overnight camping trip. They didn't know me at all because I'm a country girl at heart, and us country girls love to camp. It was a cold, rainy day, but I didn't care. I was one with nature, and it felt great. The reality of it all, though, is that if it weren't for me striving to prove myself to my kid, I wouldn't have lasted as long as I did. Most of the time, I walked with my head down and went back to the mentality that if I could just make myself invisible, I could get through this. But there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. I was stuck and living in my own personal hell. There was a moment during my 6 weeks in basic training when I again found myself face to face with God. I went to the on-base chapel and sat there confused about religion, about my feelings, and confused about what the hell I was doing in the military. I sat there in the empty pews all alone and began to cry once again for the choices I had made in my life. Only this time I knew this decision was by my hand. I was sitting there questioning everything when suddenly I felt an invisible hand on my shoulder, and I was once again wrapped in a warm embrace. With a distant voice saying everything will be all right, it was the second time in as many months to be visited by God. I left that chapel with a new respect for God and a better understanding of the word religion. With it, the hope that I still at least had Him on my side and my daughter in my heart. I left the military hoping to put some distance between me and that decision, and yet weeks, maybe even months after, I found myself doing an about face or correctly marching around in a grocery store. I would be reminded of it, and I would begin to cry all over again. I realize now it wasn't that the military was that bad. I had a lot of demons that I was running from, and while in the military, all I could do was face them. And back then, I simply wasn't ready. So I did what I did best at that time in my life. I ran. It's a very sobering moment when you realize you have become your own worst enemy, that you are the problem that needs fixing, not everyone else. While the Air Force is but a blip on the radar of my past, it became so much more to me. I will never forget the lessons it taught me. So that was chapter 11. Um, if you guys like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos, please subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification button so you are alerted to the next chapter. And you guys have a great night. Bye.